McLaren have finally confirmed that Lando Norris will be prioritised in a bid to dethrone Max Verstappen and win the Drivers' Championship. But would the championship look any different if McLaren had been prioritising Norris in previous races? Or is the papaya rules discussion actually just taking our focus away from the real problems that McLaren have had this season? Because it all started when Andrea Stella said, "We will bias our support to Lando, but we want to do it without too much compromise on our principles. What we don't want to see anymore is a situation like in Monza, because that is a detriment to the team." Now, it has to be said that even with this statement, Andrea Stella has still emphasised at the end there the need to prioritise the team over everything else, and that winning still needs to be done in the right fashion. Andrea doesn't want to be seen to win in a reckless way. But we did get confirmation that Andrea Stella has discussed it with Oscar Piastri, saying, "Even when I said to Oscar, would you be available to give up a victory? He said, it's painful, but if it's the right thing to do now, I will do it." And this was very much not the mindset of Oscar Piastri when we were back in Monza, when Piastri attacked and passed Lando Norris on the opening lap, turning the team's 1-2 start into a 1-3 by the time they got to turn 5, with the other McLaren being in the first place position. And it does feel like this statement is a direct reaction to that first lap incident in Monza. However, even going back further to Hungary, when the team made Norris hand Piastri first position back to balance out the fact that they had given Lando an undercut to defend their 1-2 from the teams attacking behind, it felt at the time like Lando giving that win to Piastri would stop anything like what Piastri did in Monza from happening. I remember Will Joseph, Lando's race engineer, saying, "The way to win a championship is not by yourself. It's with the team. You're going to need Oscar and you're going to need the team." This kind of rethink of the papaya rules has been required. And it seems silly that a team like McLaren, who haven't won consistently or even been close to a championship battle in well over a decade, are only just making these changes now. I understand that it's a big step for the team to take, but it also feels like a necessary step at this point in the season. And of course, it always comes with positives and negatives. On one side of things, having these kind of team orders in place, as controversial as some people think that that is, does give the team and the drivers clarity. Everyone in the team now knows that they're trying to give Lando Norris the best shot at closing the gap to Verstappen. And Oscar probably summarised it best himself. "Selfishly, as a driver, team orders are not that fun, but I realise that there's a much bigger picture here than just myself. Now it's an appropriate time to try and help the team win both championships." However, he did hold on to a little bit of that Oscar Piastri killer instinct that we've been seeing out on track. If we feel that someone has done a much better job on a weekend, whichever way it is, we want that person to be rewarded. And that's where it, of course, becomes a little bit tricky still, and we need to continue discussing that. So it seems like Piastri won't just let Norris roll on by if there's a victory to be had, which means there's still likely to be some situations between the pair that undoubtedly get a little bit heated over the radio. And Lando still needs to prove that he can win the Drivers' Championship and that he's the better driver on the weekend before Piastri gives up his position. And on that note of proving that he can still win the Drivers' Championship, can we really say that he's done that up to this point? Let's take a look at Lando Norris's finishing positions this season compared to Max Verstappen's. Although Lando Norris hasn't had too many absolute disaster weekends and has been in the points every single time around outside of that DNF in Austria, which to be fair is then balanced out by Max Verstappen's own DNF earlier on in the season in Australia, when you consider that the McLaren car's pace has dramatically changed as the season has progressed, particularly after that Miami Grand Prix upgrade, the fact that the head-to-head between these two is 10-7 in Verstappen's favour is really close and shows that Lando Norris can get the better of Verstappen. But for me, Lando Norris only winning 2 Grand Prix so far this season, the same number of wins as Leclerc in the Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton in his Mercedes, and his teammate Oscar Piastri in the opposite McLaren, when compared to the 7 victories of Max Verstappen, does make this title bid from Norris feel a little bit lackluster. And when wins are worth so many more points in Formula 1 compared to the podium places, it starts to highlight where the real problems lie. Because again, if we look at Lando Norris's finishing positions, this time compared to Oscar Piastri, you can actually see that there's only 5 Grand Prix where Lando Norris has been bettered by his teammate. However, in Saudi Arabia, the safety cars and strategy went against Lando Norris. In Monaco, Oscar Piastri just outqualified his teammate. And again in Azerbaijan, Lando Norris started from 15th on the grid. So there's only 2 Grand Prix where Norris has finished behind Piastri, and the Australian could have given him a position: Hungary and Monza. Every other race, Norris has been ahead or Piastri has not been able to directly help Lando Norris in any way. So let's take those two races in Hungary and Monza and say that the team had been prioritising Norris at that point in the season. Lando Norris would have gained 7 points in Hungary and 3 points in Monza. What would have changed? Looking at the difference it would make to Lando Norris's overall points from Miami, which was Lando's first win, but also the turning point for McLaren's season, the gap between Lando Norris and Verstappen in Miami was 53 points after the Grand Prix. The gap between Norris and Verstappen now is 59 points. So let's say Piastri does deliver Lando Norris those extra 10 points, and that's cut all the way down to 49 points. All of that talk about McLaren, Piastri, papaya rules, and it would only put Lando Norris 4 points better off than he was 11 races ago. Which is why I think all of this talk around whether or not the McLaren team should favour Lando Norris and whether the McLaren drivers should be able to race one another is actually taking focus away from the reality of the situation. Oscar and Lando battling out on track hasn't been the reason that Norris will miss out on the Drivers' Championship. McLaren has. Because let's go back to Lando Norris's results one last time, and instead of highlighting where Lando Norris has fallen down to Verstappen or where Oscar Piastri has cost Lando Norris points, let's instead highlight races like Saudi Arabia, Canada, and Great Britain. In Saudi, the team opted not to stop under the Stroll safety car, which meant Norris was in a really awkward spot and ended up dropping from 6th to 8th, losing him 4 points. It was then a safety car again in Canada, where the team said themselves they should have probably been better prepared with their strategy when the safety car dropped because of Logan Sargent, and that cost Lando Norris the victory there, and another 7 points. Then in Great Britain, when Lando Norris had control of the race through the middle stint, it was a pit stop once again that was the problem. Norris came in the lap after his rivals, he overshot his pit box and went on to used softs, copying Lewis Hamilton rather than the obvious choice of fresh mediums. All of that meant first became third, costing him 10 points. So yes, Norris could have been given another 10 points by Piastri, but also Norris could have picked up 21 more points had the team been better operationally and not messed up strategy decisions. And that's not to say that Lando Norris has been perfect either. He's made mistakes. He should have done better in Bahrain qualifying. He fluffed the start at the sprint race in China. You could argue he also messed up the start in Spain and then also in Austria. Of course, he's not to blame for that crash with Max Verstappen, but he definitely lost out more than Max Verstappen did. And I'm aware that nobody, including McLaren, could have envisaged the struggles of Red Bull getting to the point where they are now and the fall off of Red Bull's results. The fact that Max Verstappen went from winning 7 out of the first 10 Grand Prix to now being winless in the 7 since then, even though he still maximised the car almost every weekend in my opinion, couldn't have been predicted, and McLaren wouldn't have expected to be anywhere close to a title fight. However, there being so much discussion around Oscar Piastri's role in this title battle isn't what we should really be discussing. Instead, I think the McLaren team and the wider media should be looking at how many points the papaya team lost operationally. Even last time out in Baku, not getting a proper banker lap in for Q1 on a track where red flags and crashes do happen, meaning Lando Norris started from 15th. It was another big opportunity lost for Lando, and Oscar had nothing to do with it. In fact, all Oscar did was show his teammate exactly what he could have had by driving a stunning race and taking his second win in F1. If Lando finishes within 10 points of Verstappen at the checkered flag in Abu Dhabi, don't blame Piastri, don't blame papaya rules for Norris not winning the Drivers' Championship, because there are much more points that have been lost elsewhere. And if you want to know how close Lando Norris could have been to Max Verstappen in a universe where everything went well for him since Miami, I made this video here. So click that link and I'll see you over there.